There is a lot to learn from this story. I think it's a very valuable tool for what we're going to be looking at and dealing with in the tribulation time. Now, I've shortened this interview, or this story. I've shortened the actual video to the actual real main event that the guy's explaining he saw between the demonic creature and the angel. If you want the whole story, I'm going to put the links, all his information down below. But here we go. Let's get to it. I hope you get a lot out of it.
My encounter, and I want to say first before I launch into this encounter that, I did not intend on seeing a Dogman. I now live in a different state, Arizona to be exact. And I had a friend who is a Canadian who drove down here. I believe it was the middle of June. I think this happened on Friday the 17th, if my memory serves. And he came down a few days before that, and he stayed, a few days after. I think he was here about a week. And he's a hunter. And he's up in, I think he's in Saskatchewan, is the province that he lives in. And I guess there's a lot of hunting there. And he's a pretty avid hunter, mostly deer and elk and that type of stuff. And he does know, he's one of my closest friends, and he does know about my previous experiences, but he doesn't really believe me. He thinks that because I'm a part-time writer, that I came up with these stories just to test a script out on an audience. Right. And I assured him that wasn't the case.
You're not a hunter at all either. You're a collector of firearms.
No, I'm nothing. I'm not tactical. I'm not a camper. I'm not an outdoorsman. I am an adrenaline junkie. I've been in a lot of fights. I like to, I jumped out of planes. I bungee jumped. I used to surf really, really large waves when I was younger. Right. I do none of this stuff has been recently, right? In my early 50s now, so none of this is recently. But I am somebody that likes adrenaline. I love that feeling of almost losing control. And, I'm a gun guy, right? I'm not a gun nut, but, my grandfather was a collector. My father was a collector. I'm a collector. I've been around guns my whole life. I've spent probably hundreds of hours at the range. I used to be a member of a single action, which is like a cowboy gun, for those who don't know, single action shooting society member, so I got really good with that. I'm just a guy that spent a lot of time with I'm not really good with rifles, even, to be honest with you. Right. I have some rifles. I have enough that I could defend myself, but I'm really just a handgun guy. That's my specialty. I like handguns, and I'm good with them. I'm accurate with them. At 30 yards and in, I usually don't miss. Right. And so, but other than that, I like to hike. I can hike 10 or 12 miles if I need to, and I've done it many times. So I do like to hike. I do like to be out in the outdoors, but I'm setting the stage for this so that your listeners know I'm not like a camper or an outdoorsman. I'm not tactical. I don't go in. I don't do tactical drills, or I haven't been to any tactical schools. None of that. So I don't consider myself any of those things. I just consider myself, an aging old surfer from Southern California who is good with a handgun and likes to hike. That's really, and
you're not John Rambo.
No, I'm definitely not John Rambo or John Wick, either one.
Yeah.
But I am somebody, though, that when somebody says I can't do something, or that I don't have the balls to do something, it puts a fire under me, and I'll see if I can do it just to say that I did it. Right. But getting back to my most recent, I just was setting the stage for some of your listeners who haven't heard me on another channel. So my buddy Kevin shows up, and he's there a few days, and he says, I'd like to do a little hunting. And so I said, okay, whatever. So I found a spot north of Flagstaff, you gave the where it was when you read it, so I won't go over that. But it was north of Flagstaff, east of Flagstaff, and some mountains that are set aside. I guess if you can hunt there. It wasn't deer season though, which was interesting because I told Kevin, he had mentioned like, well, I'd like to get a deer, but he, as a hunter, I'm sure he knew this, although he's from Canada, maybe he didn't know our laws here, but it wasn't hunting season, and I told him that. And he's got a little bit of money, so he said, well, even if I get one, I'll just, and then there's a pretty big fine if you end up shooting one that's out of season. It's pretty substantial fine. But he said, well, if worse comes to worse, I'll just pay the fine. So I said, fine. So we ended up, we found a place to go. So this would have been Friday, June 17th. So coming up on a couple of months ago now. And we got in the car and we left, I don't know, 6 or 6:30 in the morning. It was about an hour and a half, maybe hour and 40 minutes to get there. And as you read, when you went over the story, we pulled into a gas station when we were getting pretty close to our destination, and we got out of the car, and we were going to go in and get a coffee and have it for the rest of the trip. And when we were walking into the mini mart, coming out, he had just come through the doors, was this old Indian man, and kind of smallish, 5'9" or so, hair in a ponytail, totally gray. When I say old, I really mean old. He was, I would say, early 80s. And he was walking directly in my path, and so out of respect, I didn't want to bump into the guy. I stepped to my right, and he had eye contact with me the entire time. And when I stepped to the right, he quickly stepped over in the same direction and got right in front of me. And he took a few more steps towards me, and he put his hand on my heart. Which, needless to say, took me by surprise. First I thought he was going to hit me, but he was very gentle. He just put his hand on my heart, and he said, "Strong spirit, but your risk taking, your recklessness." I'm sorry, I guess what he said. Your recklessness and your risk taking are going to get you killed. And then he removed his hand. He smiled at me, and he walked over to his car. He was under the canopy, just like our car was. In fact, I think he was in the next car over. And as we watched him, Kevin looks at me and he goes, "You know that guy?" I shook my head and I said, "I've never seen that guy before in my life." And he thought that was strange. I thought it was strange, and the more I thought about it, the stranger that it got. Kind of got into my head as we were driving. We got our coffee and we put the gas in the car, and I was driving, and we went on to our spot, right? But as we were driving, that kind of started getting into my head. Like, how could he have possibly known that? How would he know that I'm a risk taker? And how would he know that, I've been told earlier in my life that I have a, quote unquote warrior spirit, or a strong spirited person, independent, and which is what I took it. That's how I took it to what he meant. And I don't know that for sure, but that's how I took it. And, so as we were driving, Kevin mentioned that, he goes, "That's really odd that guy would say that." And I said, "Yeah, I said, I told you weird stuff has happened to me my whole life, man. So this isn't anything new." But I said, it is kind of odd that he knew that. And I don't typically believe in any of that Indian or Native American, if you will, mumbo jumbo stuff, the curses and I don't believe in any of that stuff, really. And but I have to admit that I thought it was odd that he knew those things about me, even though we'd never seen each other before. So we got to our site, parked the car off on the side of the road, and Kevin said to me, "How are you feeling today?" or something along those lines. And I said, "I'm good. Why?" And he's like, "Well, I feel like, really doing some hiking. So let's go way back up in there." I said, "Okay, whatever." And he's my age. We're both born in the same year. He's a little bit smaller than me. He's about 5'11", maybe 180 pounds. And for your guess, I'm a fairly decent sized guy, no giant, but I'm about 6'3", maybe 230, 228, somewhere in there. And he was carrying a Tika rifle, which is a very, very nice rifle, a high-end bolt-action rifle, 7mm. And then he had I think it was a CZ 9mm that he was carrying as his sidearm. And I didn't have a rifle with me, for your listeners and those listeners who have heard me before. I didn't even have a rifle on me. I wasn't carrying a long arm of any I had a 357, 686 plus, 7 rounds, 357 on my thigh. And as usual, I was carrying a 2.5-inch in my ankle holster that underneath my pants. That was our entire arsenal. We did not go there. I repeat, we did not go there to hunt a dogman, to kill a dogman, to even see a dogman. In fact, he and I, before that, as we were driving, we didn't even talk about Dogman. We talked about him. We talked about Dogman when he first got here.
Right.
We talked about it a little bit, but we didn't talk about it at all.
Yeah, you were under the impression, like you stated, that, and you said, hey, if you shoot a deer, it's going to be a lot of money. You were just under the impression that you were going on a hike, and that's what your agenda was for the day. You weren't going hunting. You were just hiking with your buddy.
No, I was wearing some loopholed binoculars, and he had said, and I'm not really a hunter. I've been hunting maybe twice in my life, but I'm not a hunter of any. In fact, the only thing I've ever killed is a dogman, right? And so when we were hunting, when we were out there, he had said, "Will you just be my eyes for me, and help me?" He has a scope on his rifle. He had a really nice scope on his rifle. I think it was a loophole as well. But anyway, he said, "You just be my eyes, and you look for me, help me find things, and when you're scanning like a spotter." And I said, "Yeah, no problem." That's all we were going out there for. I just want to make that perfectly clear. I know I'm belaboring the point, but I want to make it perfectly clear. We did not have any intention of seeing, hearing, listening, none of it regarding a dogman. It was the farthest thing from our minds when we, and like I said, we didn't even talk about it once on the trip out there or the day of this. So I'd say maybe an hour and a half or two, maybe not, maybe an hour of walking. It's probably, I don't know, around 11 at this point. Maybe, maybe a little earlier, maybe 10, something along that late morning time. And we came up. We were walking through fairly thick. It was forest, but it wasn't like, when you picture forest like where you're from, Jeff. Where it's real dense and there's trees every 2 yards. That's not what this was. This was like a tree here, a tree there, but there was enough of them you would still say that it was like a forest, right?
Right.
I guess you call it an Arizona forest. People that are from Flagstaff who are going to be listening to this, they're going to know exactly where I'm talking about. But we were walking through, and really it was a really nice day. Things were really quiet, but not as quiet as they were about to get. But they were quiet, peaceful. All we could really hear was our walking as we were going through. It was peaceful. The air was crisp. It was hot. It's June, right? It was pretty hot, but it was pleasant, very pleasant actually. And we came, I'm going to say it was an hour and a half into our walk, because I was starting to get tired. And as we were coming through the forest, we came up to this opening, and there was to our right, and I'm going to try to describe this as best I can, like I did on the other show, so people can really try to picture what happened. So as we come through the forest, or a light forest, we'll call it, right, to our right and up maybe a little bit elevation-wise was this knockdown tree, whatever wood. I don't know what type of wood it was. I'm not even into that. I don't know what type of wood it was, but it was like a white color, because it had been petrified, it looked like, and it had been there for many, many years. It was probably 50 feet, if I had to guess, maybe 40 to 50 feet, right? And it was laying on the ground facing this open semicircled, almost looked like a stage, because there was a like a half circle where there were trees in the forest, and then there was this open area where it was just rocks and a few shrubs, but basically flat, almost like you would envision an amphitheater back in the
Roman day. I was just gonna say that kind of.
Yeah, at Greek or Roman days, you would picture an amphitheater. It was kind of like that, and it was even elevated a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. And then it kind of went down into a little gully, and then it was elevated back where we ended up sitting down on the log. So as we saw this, right, there was trees on the right, trees on the left, and then trees back on the far end of this semicircle, and then there were no trees. It was open, so it was almost like we could see into this semicircle, if your listeners can picture that. So as we got over to the log, I said, "Oh, this is perfect height, man. We can sit on this. Why don't we stop and eat?" It was probably, I'm going to say, I might have been off on the time zone. I think it was probably closer to 11 when we sat down there. And I had brought, peanut butter sandwiches and some water, some beef jerky, and I think I brought something else too. But anyway, we sat down and, we started eating, and we had finished, we were talking, and I noticed, like, right as I was finishing my sandwich or getting towards the end of it, right, I noticed that it got quiet. And any of your listeners that know, listened to your show before, they know what that quiet means. The silence, and it was deafening, right? It got really quiet, and I said to, actually, Kevin said to me, he said, "Man, I got a bad feeling, dude." And I said, "Yeah, I know, me too." And my head was on a swivel, right? And that was the first time that Dogman even popped into my head. From the beginning of all of this, when all this morning started with him, this was the first time that it occurred to me, like this was the same thing happening all over again, where it got silent, right? Now, we still hadn't heard anything. It just got silent. There was no bugs, nothing. In fact, I could hear myself chewing. That's how silent it was. And, I'm looking around, and Kevin, he said again, he's like, "Dude, man, something's up. I just don't feel right." And he even stopped eating and put the sandwich back in the plastic bag, and I was carrying the backpack with the food in it, so he put it back into my backpack. And I finished my sandwich, and I'm starting to drink the water, and I'm like, "Yeah, dude, this doesn't feel right, man." And so we were kind of worried, and he's like, "Well, do you want to go?" And I said, "Well, I don't see anything. I don't see anything. I don't hear anything." And he's like, "Are there bears here?" And I'm like, "I don't think so. I mean, maybe black bear, but I don't think. I know there's not grizzly. Even in northern Arizona, I'm pretty sure there's no grizzly bear or something that big, right? And I don't think there's wolves either." So I said, "It could be a mountain lion or something like that." But I said, you got a 7mm. It's not going to be a problem if it's a mountain lion. So we sat there, and then I don't know. I'm trying to remember exactly how long after that we had decided we were going to get up and keep walking a little further into it, because there was where the semicircle was, there was like a I don't want to say an opening, but that's for lack of a better word or term. There was kind of an opening on the far side, because we were in front of the semicircle. If we kept going straight, we would go back into the forest, right, and keep walking. And there was a hill in the distance, and he wanted to kind of get to the base of that hill. So I said, "Okay, well, we're not that far from that, so let's just keep going." And I sent you that email. It was still fresh in my mind, or more fresh in my mind. So whatever it says in there is probably more accurate. I'm trying to do this based on on my memory, but it seems like I said to Kevin, because I'm hard of hearing, and I said to him, "Did you hear that?" And he goes, "No." So I'm listening, and then it sounded like, to me, like somebody walking right through the brush, a ways away from us still. It was kind of distant.
Okay.
And so Kevin goes, "Oh, yeah, now I hear it." So, I put my binoculars up. I'm looking around. I don't see anything. And he looked through his scope. He didn't see anything. And I said, well, I don't, that could be anything, right? And so, but sure enough, maybe 15 seconds after I said that, we see this like really large, I don't want to call it black. To me, it looked more like a chocolate colored brown wolf, right? He was on all fours. Comes through the thing, right? And immediately when I saw that, I don't remember if we had sat down behind the log. Well, I just don't remember what the events were, if we sat down behind the log. But I remember when we saw that, I told Kevin, I said, and he was already looking through it, and he goes, that's a big wolf, man. So I walked around the log, and I was on the far side of the log, right, and I kind of bent down, and I was looking through my binoculars, and he was kind of like the wolf was kind of like sniffing on the ground. He was acting like a dog, his tail was wagging a little bit. Then he went over towards a tree, and he was sniffing at the base of a tree at the far end of the semicircle. And it really did, just at that point, it was looking like a wolf. But I said, that's a really big wolf, right? So of course that fear came over me, right? I'm like, you know what, that's too big. That's not a 150-pound timber wolf. That's way bigger than that.
Right.
And Kevin concurred. He was like, yeah, that is big, dude. And I said, at this point, this animal hadn't seen us yet, right? So I got down behind the log was probably, I don't know, 18 to 20 inches off the ground, right? So I got down. I wasn't all the way down, but I was still, I was crouched down, and, Kevin, as he was, staring at this, I could see his face, right? And when I looked over at him, I could see that he'd never seen this before, right? Something this large before, right? And he kind of got this, like, I don't want to say he went white, but that's what it appeared to me, is that he was kind of going white on me. And as he was looking at it, he turned his head and he looked at me, and he's like, yeah, I don't think that's a wolf. And when he said that, I looked through my binoculars, right? And as I'm looking at this thing, sure enough, this thing like stands up, right? And when it stood up, I can't tell you, I think I said it in the letter or the email that I sent you, I can't tell you the fear that I had. And of course, the first thing that popped into my mind was, not again. There's no way. And that's what I told you earlier when we were talking. This is hard to believe that this could happen to somebody this many times. I understand it's hard to believe. I get it, because I would have a hard time believing it. But here it is. Here's this animal standing on its hind legs, and now it's like sniffing into the air. When I saw it sniffing into the air, I knew it had caught scent of us, right? And I realized at that moment that I was still within its sight. If it would have turned and looked at me, it would have seen me. So I kind of panicked, and I don't know if it was the motion of me moving so quickly to get down on my belly, or if it was the sound that I made when I hit the ground. But as I went down, Kevin was looking through the scope, right? He was just over the log, and he said that it turned and looked our way. It didn't look right at us, but it looked our way when I got down, right? So I ended up crawled a little bit to the very end of the log, because we were already pretty close to the end of it. I crawled to the end of it and kind of like lurched to my body sideways so I could see around it. So I was lower, but I could still see it. I don't know if that makes sense, but
so you were kind of like you were almost laying right next to the log, kind of using that
on the ground,
yeah,
on my elbows. Yes.
Yep.
Yes, I wasn't any taller than the log, so I didn't stand out, but I could still see him. Now there was brush, and there was shrubs and stuff that were in between where our position was and where this turned out to be a Dogman was, right? And so I would say that we were, I think I told you this in the email, but I think as best I could tell, we were about 80 yards. And so I'm trying to remember the exact sequence of events here so that I get this right. So then as we were watching it, he kind of stood up and he sniffed, and he kept doing that, right? And at one point he turned directly towards us and sniffed, and I told Kevin, I said, he can smell us. And Kevin said, he goes, is that an effing Dogman? I said, I'm not 100% sure, but I said, I'm pretty sure that it is, because I've never seen another animal stand up like that, and he seems to be walking on his hind legs, so I'm going to say that that's probably a Dogman. And we're talking really low, in case your audience is wondering, we were talking in whispers.
Right.
Kevin and I were only about 4 feet apart, so 5
now,
feet
really quick, he is the one couple of times that you guys spoke about this, he, like you said, skeptical about it.
No, he thought I was making this up.
Right.
He thought, even when I told him that I had killed one of these animals, he thought that I was, again, because I do a little writing on the side. I'm not a professional writer by any stretch, but I do a little writing on the side. He thought that I was testing a script. That's what he said. That I was testing a script for an audience to see how they received it, and if it would maybe be picked up like as a movie or something. And I told him, I said, Kevin, I swear to you, brother, that's not what I'm telling you. What happened, how it happened, and all 3 of the encounters he knew about.
Right. Now, what was his face like when he said, "Is that an effing Dogman?" and you said, "I'm pretty sure that is."
Well, Kevin's got these blue eyes. I have green eyes, right? He's got these blue eyes that are very, like, what I call telling. And when you look into his eyes, you can almost see what he's thinking, right? And I saw nothing but unadulterated fear in his eyes, because even at 80 yards, you could tell by the reference points of how tall the Dogman was to the trees that he was around 8 feet.
Okay.
And I would say, weight-wise, he's not the biggest one. The biggest one, was on another encounter I ever saw, was close to 9 feet and probably 600 pounds. This one, if I had to guess, I would say, I'm not saying I have an expert opinion, but my opinion would be he was probably close to 8 feet and about 500 pounds.
Okay.
And when he walked, you could hear the thumping when he walked. So he must have had some weight. If he was only 150 pounds, you wouldn't have heard him as he was walking through the forest like we did from that distance, right?
Yep.
So now I'm trying to remember the exact sequence of events at this point. So when Kevin and I were talking, I looked at Kevin and I said, shh, because I had seen him look our way a couple of times. Now, I don't think he saw us, because he didn't act like he did at all, but he did look our way a couple of times. So I'm sure he either heard, and they have great hearing, right?
Yeah.
That he either heard the rustling or maybe the whispers or something, but he just couldn't place where it was. I have to say to anybody listening, I never even drew my gun. This entire encounter, what I'm about to tell you, I never even drew my gun. I never even pulled my gun at all. Right. Evan was only using his to look through. So at some point, again, if people, go back and listen to what your show from 10 days ago or a couple weeks ago, if they want the exact, I'm trying to do this on memory, and if I'm off on the sequence of events, what I'm saying is absolutely true and how it happened, but what I want to get right is the sequence of events, and that's what I'm not 100% sure that I'm giving the right sequence of, say, like this happening before that happened, but the sum and substance is there. So at some point when we're watching him, right, I hear again, like coming from the opposite side of the semicircle, I hear more footsteps, also heavy. And so now the Dogman, who's he's looking around, sniffing, right? He's just doing what Dogmen do, right? He didn't appear, in my opinion, I don't think he knew that we were there 100% yet. He was about to know, but he did at that moment. I don't think he knew.
Okay.
And so here comes this, I'm just going to say, man, right? Here comes this really large after we heard the crunching of leaves, we noticed, and I'm watching this entire thing through my binoculars, and these are really good binoculars, so I can see everything perfectly clearly at 80 yards. Perfect. And I hear this crunching, and I notice that at one point the Dogman then turns immediately. He takes about 3 steps back, and he's facing whatever this is that's coming through the other side. There's probably, I would say, 15 yards between the Dogman and here comes this large, for lack of a better descriptive term so your audience understands, Nordic man with, like I said, I don't want to belabor the point, but I really like women, so I don't want people to take this the wrong way. But he was the most beautiful man I've ever seen.
Right.
And he comes through the forest, and he's wearing this. I mean, the clothes didn't look that outlandish, but they just didn't. He had a black mock neck on, or maybe it was dark gray, and he had a light gray, what I would call like a windbreaker looking thing, and then these pants on that were a similar color to the jacket. Or no, actually they were a little bit darker. They were more like the mock neck, and then he had these like kung fu looking shoes. They weren't kung fu shoes, but that's what they looked like to me, because they didn't really have a heel on them. And he had this like wrapping, like like the World War I soldiers had those things that they'd put on over their boots, so their boots wouldn't get caught and stuff, and then like it would come up above the bottom of their pants.
Yeah, so things couldn't get in their pant too. Yeah.
Right. It was similar to that, but it was just cloth that he had wrapped, he had wrapped tightly around.
Okay.
And he was wearing these like dark colored kung fu shoes, right? He had socks on. The only thing you could really see of him, everything was covered except his hands and his face. And he looked sunburned, but he had this, what I would call a long flat top type hairdo. I told you this in the interview, or when we first talked. He looked like he was much better looking than Dolph Lundgren, but that's who he reminded you of from Rocky IV.
Right.
Just that same type of haircut, platinum blonde hair like that, these piercing blue eyes that I could see through the binoculars. That's how blue his eyes were. I could see them looking through the binoculars at 80 yards away. Okay. So that should tell you how blue his eyes were.
Right.
And here he comes out, right, and he's wearing, now it wasn't a katana, but for lack of a more descriptive term, that's what it appeared like, and people don't know that's a samurai sword, right? It looked like a samurai sword, maybe a 2.5-inch blade, and then he had look to me, I don't know this for sure, I'm just speculating here, but it looked like a matching dagger that was maybe 12 inches long.
Okay.
On his hip, on his, I guess you'd call it his hip, on the opposite, which would have been his right side.
Right.
And he had
Not to correct you, but 2.5 foot you meant, right? Not 2.5 inch.
Yeah, sorry,
okay.
2.5. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to get that so people could, there was no mistake.
Yeah, not 2.5 inches. That would have been a problem, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So, and he had this like scabbard on the back of he had some sort of a strap that was holding the scabbard on the back, right? And you could see the sword handle sticking up above his head. Now, for your audience, when I say that this man was large, I'm not just saying it because I'm at 6'3" and we'll call it 230. I'm not a giant, but I'm a pretty decent sized guy. And this guy was, well, later on, as I get into the story, I know for sure he was about 6'8", but I even guessed him at that when he first came out. I said, this guy's got to be 6'7", 6'8", 265 pounds, a large man.
Right.
Not just a 6'3" guy and the 225 pounds. No, this was a large man, and you could see that he was muscular through his clothing, and his clothing wasn't tight, it was baggy.
Okay.
Well, at least the jacket was kind of baggy, but the mock neck looked like it was tight, but he had a jacket over it, and you could still see how big this dude was. So he comes through this like opening, and as he comes through, the Dogman kind of looks surprised and takes another few steps backwards. And as he does that, this man reaches behind and he pulls out the katana, and he does that thing. And I know you mentioned it. I don't know what it's called, but people who know swords will know what I'm talking about. That thing where you twirl it in your hand, right?
Yeah.
And he does it with one hand, right? And he just, he moves the sword, right? And at that moment, I think that was the moment where Kevin said, "Are we on a movie set?" And I looked at him and I go, "It kind of seems that way, right? We're whispering, right? It kind of seems that way." And then Kevin, when I think it was a little before that, now that I'm thinking about it, but again, go back and read the story if you guys want the actual.
Yeah, I'll put the link. I'll put the link to the story in the description. So
because I'm trying to get the sequence of events, but I think I'm off on that. But Kevin at some point had said, "Yeah, are we on a movie set?" And I'm like, "It sure looks like it, right?" But there were no cameras, there was no other people. We were totally alone, so I don't think we were on any type of a movie set, right? I mean, I just don't. But Kevin had said when this guy came out, Kevin lost his composure a little bit, and he gave away our position. And he kind of was babbling, and he's like, "Dude, should I shoot it? That guy's gonna get killed, man. That guy's gonna get killed."
Yeah.
And when he said that, both the Dogman and this individual looked. It's almost like we interrupted their about to be battle, and they both turned and looked at us. And I knew at that point that they knew we were there because Kevin, he had lost control a little bit. He said it way too loud, and I knew they heard us because they looked as soon as he said it. And he said it a couple of times, and he's like, "Dude, should I shoot it? Should I shoot it?" And I said, "No, man, just be quiet. Be quiet." He kept going, and I looked at him, and I don't normally talk to my friend that way, but I could tell he was, he was scared, right? And so I said, "Shut the F up." And so,
yeah, he's losing it at that point.
He kind of gathered himself a little bit, right? And I think he said, "Copy that," something along those lines. And so as soon as I got him to quiet, I looked back, they were still staring at us, right? So I knew that they might not have been able to see our actual position, but they knew somebody was there at that point.
Right.
So the Dogman took 2 steps forward, and when he did, this man tilted his sword back and put the tip right against his forehead and closed his eyes.
Huh.
And I remember thinking, what? I remember my exact thought was, who in the hell is this guy? Because he seemed so calm, so like he had done this before.
Right.
And maybe he has, but I just, you don't know that when you're,
at this point, you don't know anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't know anything. You got to try to put yourself in my shoes. Your audience should put themselves in my shoes. I'm viewing this with all my baggage that I bring, and here I am now seeing this again. I'm not involved myself, but I'm watching this much stranger event than any of my encounters. I'm watching this strange event unfold, and here's this tall Nordic-looking, Anglo-looking dude closing his eyes when he's got a Dogman 30 feet in front of him and putting the tip of his spear against his forehead, and looked to me like he was praying. That's what it looked like. And then he opened his eyes again, he did that twirl in his hand, and he pointed the sword right at the Dogman. Right? And they kind of stood, and they weren't moving. Both of them were just kind of locked in a stare. I don't know if they were thinking about what they were going to do, but then all of a sudden, it kind of took me by surprise how quick. I know how fast they are, but when you see them move, it's always, a little overwhelming to see just how quick they move, right? And he closed the distance so quickly. But what was more startling was how this guy brought the katana up to his right and slashed down, if your audience can understand what I'm saying, slashed down from top right to bottom left. And as he did it, he kind of did I don't even want to, I don't know how to explain it, but he was able to do that and move. He twisted his body and he moved, And while he was moving, he ducked because the Dogman swiped with his left hand, and he had his claws out. He swiped with his left hand, and the guy was able to avoid it, but he had put a deep gash in the chest, so deep that the Dogman put his hand up on his chest, and he turned around, and when he turned around, you could see the ray. He was bleeding from his chest big time. Oh, the Dogman and this guy were standing in the opposite places they had been when they started this fight, right? The man was on the other side and the Dogman was on the other side, and they had squared off again. And so there was a little break in the action where they were just staring at each other. And I swear to you, I can't say for sure, but it looked to me like the dude smiled at him.
Yeah.
Like he looked at this creature and smiled at it, right? And you
like a mocking kind of smile, like
a mocking smile, like you don't know what's just about to happen.
Right.
That's what I took it, right? And so the Dogman was just like, he took his hand off his chest, and he was like, I don't know how to explain it, but he was kind of doing like this thing with his hands. He was like he was shredding something, wanting to get at him, and he was growling and really loud and snarling. I mean, just frightening stuff, right? And so I looked back at the man, and he's just standing there, right? And sure enough, they're probably only 15 feet apart. And so the Dogman maybe takes 3 steps, and he had closed half the distance in those 3 steps, right? And to my surprise, this man took 3 steps forward as well and drove the katana with both hands into the stomach and out up he drove it through the stomach, but it kind of went up and came out the back of the Dogman. And then as he did it, he kind of did a tuck and roll to his left, like towards us, but to his left. And the Dogman, and then he kind of turned around. The Dogman kind of spun around a little bit. And after he did this, the blonde guy actually turned his back and was looking out at us. And the Dogman was kind of going left and right, left and right. He was kind of like wavering. You could tell he was done just by looking at him, right? And the man was out, like, it was almost, I felt like he was looking at us, and he wasn't looking directly at us, but he was out looking like he was saying, to me, it seemed like he was saying, did you guys see that? that was the feeling that I got, right? And so he had his back. This is how confident he was. He actually had turned his back on this Dogman. Apparently he knew he had him because the Dogman kind of wavered and went right. He turned around a little bit, and he was kind of choking, and blood was coming out, and he's making all these noises. You could tell he was done, right? And so he fell only maybe 6 feet from the feet of this guy. So the guy takes his little, not a little, but it's a big dagger, 12-inch dagger out, and he walks up and he grabs the head, and he like lifts up the head. The Dogman was still alive at this point. He was a goner, but he was still alive, and he like grabs his head and he lifts it a little bit, and he plunges this thing into the neck of the Dogman.
Wow.
And I heard Kevin go, "What the F?" And I'm starting to like go. And I said to Kevin, and this is the time I said to him, I said, dude, we got to be on a movie set or something. I mean, what? And he's like, dude, there's got to be cameras. He said that. He's like, there's got to be cameras around here or something. This is some sort of we're watching some sort of special effects or something. And I said,
Cryptid Kill Bill or something.
Yeah. We were just speechless. And so when after he drove it in, he kind of stood up, right? And he looked at it for a second, and you could see the Dogman slowly stop. He was moving, and then he stopped moving, right? And the man was just looking down at him, right? And then he turned, and he walked out towards the end of, the beginning of this semicircle, right? And he spoke directly to us. And he said, you guys can come out now. Just like that. Regular American English. No English speaking, from England type, just a regular. It almost sounded like he was from California, to be honest with you. Just the way he said, you guys can come out now. Just in that calm of a voice, right? So then he goes back, and we're still watching, and he goes back, and he pulls out the knife. He pulls out this little cloth from inside of his jacket, and he wipes down his puts his dagger back in its sheath, and then he pulls out he had to like move the Dogman's body a little bit, and he pulls out his knife, and with the same cloth, he wipes the blade down, right? And I noticed that when he did that, there was no blood of any kind. It looked the same way it looked when he brought it out from his jacket. He wiped off the blood, put the thing back inside pocket of his jacket, is what it looked like to me. And then he did this thing where he placed his sword back in the sheath. It was on the opposite side. If you know, like when people wear a scabbard on their back like that, it's usually to one side of the head or the other. Well, with his right hand, he took it without finding it with his left hand and found the opening of the sheath. That's a 1 in a million type thing, right?
Yeah,
and he was able to. Yeah, it was almost impossible. And he got it in on the first try, like he had done it so many times before. And so Kevin and I, at this point, and I might be out of sequence here on exactly, but you get the gist of it. And so we're looking at each other, and Kevin goes, "What do you think?" And I said, "I don't really know what to think, Kevin." Just like that. I said it just in that tone. I said, "I don't really know what to think." And he's like, "Well, do you think this guy's dangerous?" I said, "He very well could be dangerous." And then this man said again, he's like, "I'm not going to hurt you guys." And so I looked at Kevin and I whispered and I said, "Okay, don't point the gun at him, but keep the gun and keep your rifle in your hand. Just don't point it at him." And Kevin looked at me and he says, "Okay." So we stood up and we made eye contact with him finally. And we're about now, I'd say, because he'd walked to the outer end of this circle, so we were maybe 60 yards from each other. So we started walking, and he went back at this point over by the Dogman, and so we were walking up, and as we got up to him, I think I said first, however it's written in the story is how it went down, but I think I said first, "Where did you come from?" And he said something like, I was out hunting, right? I think that's what he said, something along those lines. And, he had said, I think we said something along the lines of, or I said, well, he asked what we were doing, right? And we said, well, we were out hiking, we were, hunting. And I think I said, but I wasn't hunting this. And he said, "Not this time." And he smiled at me, and he called me by my first name, Brad, and he knew Kevin's name too.
Yeah.
And Kevin said again, and I know I'm belaboring this, but I want your people to know how it's written, how you wrote it is actually how it happened. I'm trying to remember what he said when he said it and the sequence, but I'm just going to say what I think I remember. Kevin said, "How do you know our names?" And this guy said, "Oh, I think you know the answer to that." And he kind of smiled at us. And he had said when we walked up, he said, "Don't shoot." He put his hands up jokingly, right? He said, "Don't shoot me, Kevin."
Yeah.
And Kevin looked like he was about to shit his pants, to be honest with you. And so I said, where did you come from? And he goes, "Oh, I was out." He goes, "I was just hunting." I said something like, "You were hunting with that?" I said, "You don't even have a," he's like, "Well," and he pointed to my 357 and he goes, "That's cheating." He goes, "If you really want to hunt one," something along the lines, "if you really want to hunt one, the best way to do it is a sword." And I started laughing, and I said, he pointed at my gun, he goes, "Those are cheating." And he goes, "And you well know, Brad, how hard it is to kill one with those."
Yeah.
And when he said that, it felt like he was reaching into my soul, and he was, I don't know, you can tell when I'm talking about it, it's almost too much for me to even believe that I lived it. And so we said a couple other things, and then I said, "What's your name?" No, that was after. I think that's when he was walking away. Yeah, that's when he was walking away. I think I said something like, "So, what do you, and he goes, oh, that's right. I said, what do you guys call these things? And he goes, well, I believe you guys call them dogmen.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, you guys, well, aren't you a member of you guys, right? But I didn't say that at the time, but that's what I was thinking. And I said, well, what do you guys, and I kind of joked when I said that. I was, kind of had a smile on my face. I said, well, what do you guys call them? And he goes, well, they have many names, but the one we use most is Hell-hound. I said, Hell-hound, that makes sense. And he's like, that makes sense. And he said, you guys got to be careful out here. And I said, really? And then I don't think you wrote this I don't think I wrote this in the email, but I forgot. But he had said, he was out here for you, Brad. And I said, who was out here for me? And he pointed down at the Dogman. And I thought that's what sent chills through and I said, really? We didn't. And then I reiterated, I said, we didn't come out here to hunt this. We came out here just to hike, and Kevin wanted to get a deer or something.
Right.
And he's like, well, he was here. He was here because you were here. And I just kind of shook my head, and I was, I didn't know what to say. And he goes, you guys really got to keep your head on a swivel when you're out here. And I said, yeah, no shit. And he kind of chuckled. And he said, well, I guess I better be getting back. And then he picked up the ankles of both legs and like you would carry if you were going to drag something behind you, right, some sort of a big animal, you would grab them by the heels, right? Yeah. And in this case, it wasn't a heel. You know what the Dogman feet look like, right? He grabbed them by like that thing on the back of their foot.
Kind of like that ball thing at the back.
Yeah, that ball thing, exactly. That's how I would describe it too. And he started walking towards the opposite end of the semicircle, like he was going to go back into this. There was an opening on the other side of the woods. Not an opening, but there was enough room between the trees that he could walk, dragging this creature, right? And I said, so that's it? And he goes, I'll see you again, Brad. And then he got maybe 10 feet away from me. And maybe not even that, maybe 7-8 feet away from me. And the Dogman was literally at my feet. And he said, I go, so that's it? What's your name? And he turned with he still was holding on to the animal, but he turned and he looked, and it was the first time that we made direct eye contact close like that. And he looked at me into my green eyes with his blue eyes, right? And he said to me with this quirky kind of smart-ass smile, you can call me Daniel.
Huh. Yeah.
And I said, okay, well, and he kind of turned around and he was laughing. And I said, well, I'll see you, Daniel. That was the last thing I said to him. And as he was walking away, he yelled out over his shoulder, don't shoot me, Kevin. And then he kept walking, and we could hear him laughing as he was walking. I mean, he had a sense of humor, right? He's like, don't shoot me, Kevin. Right. And he kept walking, and about maybe 15 seconds after that, we couldn't see him anymore, and all of a sudden we couldn't hear him anymore. He was gone.
That's where the email that you sent me ended.